We're good to go. Above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man, you were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders this world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Crucified, laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. I felt it in my mind.
Did you?
Yeah.
I was waiting for the big bang.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yes.
Yeah. So beautiful. Christ thought of us above all. Well, tonight we're going to do some, what does it say on the program?
Marriage dynamic.
Marriage dynamics.
there you go.
And Ben is actually quite surprised. But I'm following the program.
Yeah, should I leave? Should I
And,
leave now?
and our manual for tonight is Return of Elijah for marriage dynamics. How's that? You ready? Does that sound a bit of light reading? Let's bow our heads and we'll pray. Father in heaven, we just thank you that we can come before you again at the appointed time to receive living bread from heaven in a magnified version. And Lord, I know that as we share tonight that you will be our teacher. For words are pointless unless you should instruct us as to their meaning, and that they take root in our souls to then be manifested in the person of Christ, or Christ manifested in us. And I pray that as we look at this material tonight, that you would guide us and we would connect a few more of the pieces in the puzzle. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. It comes to us somewhat of a surprise when you open the book Return of Elijah, that if you read the preface, that my concern wrote the book. I'm hearing voices, my dear. That when I first headed down this path in regard to the book Return of Elijah, most people understand this volume. For those who've, oh, look at that, shop online. That when you look at this, that this book is about the Trinity, and there are elements on the Trinity in this book. But I want you to read. I'll read the preface to you because it will give you a bit of an idea of where my thinking was. Over recent years, I've become increasingly concerned about issues related to church governance, or more specifically, the impact of gender-neutral ordination, you like that? Gender-neutral ordination, and its impact on families and on family blessing structures with the dismantling of male headship. That's the opening line of the preface to the book. So this was the issue that I was concerned about, that how does our understanding of God affect our family structures and the way that blessing operates within families? And that's what was one of the things that led me back into the issue of the Trinity. It wasn't what I started with. I started with the fact that the church was asking me as a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, do you support women's ordination or not? So when I went and studied my Bible and looked at these things, I could see, whoa, lots of problems with this idea. While at the same time I could see that women's ordination was an attempt to affirm women in ministry, which is a noble thing to do, isn't it? It is. It's a good thing to do. So I could see that the desire of many of my colleagues was a good desire. They wanted to affirm women in ministry. But I asked myself about this question. And so I have a quote here from an Adventist theologian. And, you know, it's like all areas. Every area, they specialise with a certain language so that it gives you the impression that you really don't know, you really don't understand what they're talking about, and that gives them the impression that they know something that you don't know. But in any case, I can decode this language, and this is what this theologian says. Whenever an issue regarding ecclesiology arises, what's the word ecclesiology to do with? To do with the church. So we can just replace that with the word church and make it a lot easier. Whenever an issue regarding the church arises, it should be solved in the light of theology. And theology is the study of God. Christology, which is the study of Christ. It says pneumatology, study the Holy Spirit. And soteriology, study the plan of salvation. You could just use these words, it would be a lot easier. But in essence, what it is saying, that if you want to study about church governance, you need to study, the first thing he says, you need to study about the subject of God. This is what it is saying here in the book. And so that was one of the things that led me to study this issue of the relationship between God and His Son and its impact on marriage and the church relationship. So one of the things that I did in building up to my understanding of this, and it's just part of the layering that I try to put into the books that I write, but section 6 of Return of Elijah is on the restoration of relational-based thinking, and it has to do with the family. And it's number 6 because 6 is the number of man. There's some things I like to put layer into the book. So section 6 is all about the relationship between God and His Son being reflected by the relationship between husband and wife. Now, just to give you, I have a quote here on page 218 of the original edition of Return of Elijah. And this is a quote from the Adventist Record in 2007, April 14, 2007. just listen carefully to what it says. Prior to the fall, Adam and Eve were co-equals and complementary to each other. See Genesis 1:26 to 30. Neither ruled over the other. Their God-ordained role was to co-rule in their care of the natural world and to reflect within their marriage a taste of the unity and equality that exists within the Godhead. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? So we see here, this is within the record.
Wow.
Adventist record, April 14, 2007, clearly making a link between the relationship between man and wife and the unity and equality that exists within the Godhead.
How can they know that before the fall? I thought you were quoting other light for a second. I was, whoa.
No, this is my colleagues offering this a post-grace rectification. So I'm reading this material, and within the fundamental belief statement of Seventh-day Adventists, there is a clause in there that says that the unity of the body of Seventh-day Adventists is anchored or based in the unity that exists in the triune God. That's very significant. Unity within Adventism, in the Adventist movement, from particularly 1980 onwards, is that unity is based in the triune nature of God. And so that's one of the main things of this book, and I've written this in the introduction, that if you don't get anything out of this book, there's one thing I want to get across to you, and that is, how do we understand equality? How do we define equality? That's the key issue. And so the difference between the begotten Son and the unbegotten Son in relationship to the Father has a direct effect on how that a husband and a wife would see their equality. What is their equality based on? And these are the thoughts that I've tried to lay out systematically within the book Return of Elijah. There are many, many things in this book that really need to be amplified and brought out, but I haven't had time to get back to doing that. But these are things that I began to think about, and so I remember a defining moment, and I've got it written here, but I'll go and I can quote it for you. Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1, page 24, down the bottom. Going on to page 25, it says, "And God said to his Son, let us make man in our image." And so there's a whole section in section 6 of Return of Elijah that talks about how man was made in the image of God. And as all of us, or most of us here, have been studying, that Eve came forth from Adam, and she was fully human like he was, and yet she received everything that she had through the man, and she was fully human as he was human, and yet she received it all by inheritance. She inherited everything through Adam, because he was already the head of the garden. He was already in charge and been given this dominion, and then when Eve came forth, she inherited everything that Adam possessed by virtue of her relationship to him. And that spoke very powerfully to me about definitions of equality. How is Eve equal with Adam? And we would ask the question, if we would put this up against Augustine's three omnis, omnipotence, which is all-powerful, omniscience, which is all-knowing, and omnipresence is the capability to be everywhere at once. If this is the basis of equality that exists within the Godhead, and man looks to this, then he's looking for power-based equality. So we think about this in terms of, well, strength. On average, men tend to be a little stronger than women. The Bible says, giving honour unto the woman as unto the weaker vessel. So there's certainly not equality there, except for those women that work out in the gym and build themselves up and maybe do some weightlifting. But other than those, typically men are stronger, and so there wouldn't be typically an equality there. Generally, except if you're living in the Netherlands or Norway, men are typically taller than women, or in some places in South Africa, who come from the Dutch. So I'm always looking my aunties in the eye, up the same height as me. So, but typically there is slight difference in height. So if we use these as measurements of equality, obviously they fail, don't they? Because equality is not based in those things. And what is the equality of men and women based in? In the relationship. And if we look to the relationship between God and his Son, if you have the understanding of the Trinity, that Jesus is equal with God because of his power, position and performance, then those are the things that you are going to naturally bring into your concepts of equality between men and women. And this is disastrous. But John chapter 10 verse 15 gives us a definition of equality that offers us hope. John chapter 10 verse 15. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father. Is that equality? As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father. And so in the garden, Eve could say, as Adam knows me, so know I Adam. None of the other animals or creatures in the garden could say this. They certainly couldn't say it in the language that Adam and Eve spoke. They spoke different languages, obviously, in whatever animalese language that they spoke, but or communicated in. But Eve was the only one in the garden that had the capacity to comprehend and understand Adam, and to know his thoughts and to understand him in such an intimate way. No one else in the garden could do this. And so this is what we would call relational equality. The capacity to know the other as you are known, and yet have differences that exist in other ways. So that was very big in my thinking in terms of the relationship between men and women, and why the subject of the begotten Son is so critical, so vital in terms of marriage. So if I would say to someone who is seeking marriage counselling, the first thing you have to understand is the begotten Son. You have to understand the principle of inheritance. And that Jesus is equal with God, isn't he?
John 5:18. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but said that God was his Father, making himself equal.
Making himself equal with God. But in what capacity? In a relational sense. Who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God. But the question is, upon what basis did Christ not consider it robbery to be equal with God? Did he measure power for power, strength for strength, height for height, age for age? Is that upon which he pulled out his pedigree and says, I've got the right stuff, so you will accord me a place of equality with yourself?
No, he said, my Father is greater than I.
He said, my Father is greater than I.
He received all the things from me.
I have received everything from my Father. And yet he considered himself equal with God. Because he knew the Father. No one else in the universe knew the Father as the Son of God knew him. He was the only one The only being in all the universe that could enter into all the counsels of God. Not on the basis of exclusion, it was on the basis of relationship. The fact that Christ understood the Father. No matter how much Lucifer would seek to understand the Father, because of his position and his station, he could not understand the Father in the way that the Son of God understood the Father. And one of the things that shows to me very clearly that the Son of God is God and that he's not a created being is the fact that he can behold the Father directly without seeking to take his position or to be exactly as he is. Every created being would seek, because of their creation, to emulate exactly the one who had created them. But the Son of God doesn't do this. And this is proof of his divinity. Because when Satan sought to eliminate Christ and he beheld the Father directly, he wanted to act like the Father, not submit to anyone, not obey anyone, not do any of those things because of his view of the Father without Christ, thus proving that he is a created being. Does that make sense? But Christ could... When Christ beholds the Father, he doesn't turn into Satan. He doesn't say, I will ascend into heaven, I will be like the Most High, the angels will submit to me just like they submit to my Father. He doesn't think like this. He already possesses all things through the inheritance that he has received of his Father. And so the difference, one of the key differences, and I've written about this in a few articles on the website, the key difference between the Son of God and God the Son can be summed up in one word. Gratitude. How do we get that? The Son of God inherited all things, and thus the vibration that comes out of his spirit is one of gratitude and thankfulness to God. But God the Son didn't inherit anything from anybody. He is God in his own right, and therefore he rules as God the Son by right. Whereas the Son of God rules by privilege. This is a completely different mindset. Do you understand what I'm saying? And therefore, the struggle of God the Son is to assert his rights and to proclaim his position and assert his right to rule because of his pedigree as God the Son.
It's always going to be hard for God the Son when there's only one God.
Exactly. It's always going to be hard, isn't it? Constant need to prove oneself and to demonstrate. And so what did he... Well, he needed to come down here and show his stuff and die on the cross and show that he's got the right stuff to demonstrate to you that he's God. He was willing to put it on the line. So much was he willing to put it on the line that he was the one that was willing to come down here and not the Father. And that's why everyone's praising Jesus in the churches. Because he was the one that came down and did it. Because if it's performance-based religion, he performed. He did the deed. You see? So, the difference, whereas the Son of God is seeking to have his true relationship to his Father revealed. That his identity, his is an identity war. That his true relationship to his Father would be known, in order that those who come into an experience with Christ would be filled with gratitude, rather than with a sense of my rights to rule. Did Luca hear that? My rights.
My right to go to heaven.
He's not listening. So, and this is what do we see in the social justice movements around the world today? What is it about? Equal rights. I have my right. It's not about privilege.
It's my right to go to heaven.
It is. Well
Eternal
done.
life is a right.
Eternal life is a right. It's my right. He's good. So, the difference, this is the... Ben.
Just to add to why Christ, through his submission is also demonstrating his gratitude. It's just a brief section in Desire of Ages 4:35. It says, had Lucifer really desired to be like the Most High, he would never have deserted his appointed place in heaven, for the Spirit of the Most High is manifested in unselfish ministry. Lucifer desired God's power, but not his character.
Yeah, power, not character. There is the keys between the two kingdoms. One is a kingdom of character, the other is a kingdom of power. Power as defined, equality, and this is the key point that we make, is that equality within the Trinity is defined by power, position, and performance. That's how equality is defined in the Trinity. In the begotten Son, it is defined by relationship. And it's that relationship that is vital to how man and woman look at God in order to understand that relationship. And here's a thought. Here's a thought for us to consider. One of the things in terms of gratitude. The first thing is, as a man in this world, are you filled with gratitude that God has given you all things? That you have everything that you possess, you have inherited through Christ from the Father. So that you should be living a life of gratitude and thankfulness to God. So that your life is a continual life of rejoicing and thankfulness to God. And what else do we notice? That a man in that relationship, we're basing it on 1 Corinthians 11:3. I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. So when Christ's position was challenged as the Son of God, did he reach out to defend himself? Who defended the Son? The Father said, sit still, my Son, till I make your enemies your footstool. The Father. So the Son rests in his Father. He doesn't seek to defend and protect himself. He simply rests in his Father's authority. And that rest allows him to remain gracious with gratitude. And then we can add to that rest. Rest. I asked this question of a good friend of mine in the Adventist Church. On the seventh day Sabbath, does the Son of God actually rest? Does Jesus actually rest on the Sabbath? An example, so we watch him rest, so we emulate. This is quite an interesting thing. Do we just, we see him demonstrating rest so that we can copy his example. But the problem with that is that the Bible says he neither slumbers nor sleeps. And because Jesus has, this is the point, if Jesus is Almighty God, exactly the same as the Father, and everything comes back to him as it does to the Father, technically he does not rest in the Father. Because he's exactly the same as the Father. And that was the question I was seeking to understand. And he said to me, no, he doesn't actually rest. He demonstrates rest as an example to us, but he doesn't actually rest because he's God. And God neither slumbers nor sleeps. That's true, isn't it? Sort of. Maybe. And that was quite a revelation to me, to realize that the Trinity and the Sabbath are mutually exclusive ideas. Because the only way that you and I can rest is to receive the spirit of rest. You cannot manufacture rest. You must receive the spirit of rest of someone who is resting. And the only one who is resting is the one who rules by privilege, who has a spirit of gratitude and dwells in the bosom of his Father and rests in his Father. That person is resting and is trusting someone greater than himself. Is he not? And that experience is what is given to us on the Sabbath. We do not manufacture a rest on the Sabbath, a restful spirit. We enter into rest, into the rest of someone who rests in the bosom of his Father. And that's why I say again, the Trinity as three co-equal, co-eternal beings who have life and power in themselves with no inheritance can know nothing of the Sabbath. That's why the Trinity and Sunday are always together. That's why all those who enter into the Trinity ultimately must go back to Sunday. They must. That's where it must go. Because it's logically consistent to operate in this way. So, when we think about man trusting and being thankful to God, and for those of us on the female side of this equation, has the thought ever come into your mind, I'm so thankful for all that I have received from mankind? Have you ever had that thought?
I don't think he was asking this.
Thank you, Lester. You've declared your masculinity. Very good. So, but a thought from the feminine side, that all that you have received has come from mankind. Woman means one who is taken out of. Is there a sense of gratitude that comes from this? This is an important question, because if you are raised with a belief of the immortality of the soul, or you worshipping in the Trinity, and what you have is yours. And so in the relationship, in the marriage relationship, you are there by right. And to assert your rights. And to protect your rights. And to ensure that your spouse does not encroach upon your rights. That's how it works, isn't it?
This is all the theory.
I trained you to say that.
And so we see in the father and son relationship that the relationship that God has with his son has caused the release of tremendous blessing into the universe. And that we were made in the image of God and his son. That through the husband and wife relationship, great blessing might be released into the universe. But obviously, where there is the potential for great blessing, the risk is if that relationship should be transformed into something else, the marriage relationship can be the cause of great curse to come upon the earth. And what do we see upon the earth? And that's where we come to Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children of the fathers, lest I smite the earth with a curse. But the only real way that a children's heart can be turned towards his father and to look to his father as someone that is worthy to submit to and honour, where does he learn the principle of submission to authority? Who will teach him this? His mother is the only one that can teach him. And if the mother is approaching the father as one who is asserting her rights and telling him his place, what does she teach the children? To do the same thing. To assert their rights and not seek a blessing from their father, but to remind him of their rights in regard to him. So it's quite a delicate thing, isn't it? Quite a delicate arrangement that we have here. And so we see that the beginning, if we look at the father and son relationship, that the father in the very beginning, everything that he had, he gave to his son. He gave everything. And so the pattern for us here is that the husband gives everything to his wife. And let's give some really practical examples about this. So, honey, you went shopping today. What did you buy? How much money did you spend? You bought what? Does that happen in some homes?
But it was 50% off.
Don't go there.
Bought a Jeep. Did you buy a Jeep, Debbie?
Want to go to Specsavers first?
Now you're going to buy a bigger boat.
Want to go to Specsavers?
Money is one of the battleground areas of a marriage relationship for many people in terms of who decides how the money is spent and where it is spent and how it is controlled. So obviously if a husband is continually asking his wife what she's spending money on and where she is and what she's doing, what message is he sending to her? I don't trust you. That's the message you're sending. So, this is marriage 101. You know, you see in some of the younger relationships where a male partner he's texting his wife every 15 minutes. Yeah, it happens. What are you doing?
I love you. Thinking of you. Hope you're having a great day.
Hope you're having a great day.
She's sitting on the other side of the table.
And what do you do? So, as we get into male-female relationships, we have one of two choices, don't we? We either start to laugh a lot, or we start to cry. And so, lest I lead you down the path of absolute merriment and enjoyment through sarcasm and the crucifixion of the marriage relationship, I just want to put a pause on that just a little bit. So, because it's funny how that we laugh at these things because we can identify with them, and it's not really good to cry in these situations, so we cover it with laughter because we identify with it. But continually asking your spouse where they are and what they are doing doesn't send a blessing upon your wife. But when we look at the father and son relationship, we see this bestowal of blessing. Did the father hold back anything from his son? Nothing. He gave him everything, access to everything. All things he gave him access to. Which leads us to the question, as we see in many European countries, of the introduction of the prenuptial agreement. You know what that is? If things should go south, well, this is mine and you can't have it. So a prenuptial agreement is a guarantee that the marriage can never be of an agape nature because neither partner is giving themselves fully to the other.
No risk.
No
risk.
No risk. No risk. But risking yourself in the world that we live in today, it's high risk, isn't it? Many of us have been burnt in relationships, and therefore there's understandably a cause for concern and the natural tendency to want to protect oneself within the relationship. And so my observation is this in regard to the marriage relationship, particularly those of us who've been raised in a Western culture that has been dominantly Judeo-Christian culture that is a worship of the Trinity, and the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, is that the co-equality of male and female is power, position and performance. And therefore it automatically sets up the likelihood of a tussle between male and female because of that. Does that make sense? So that when a husband says to his wife, I think we need to leave this town and we need to go to another city and we need to start and do something else. what possibly could be the wife's response to that?
Going on your own.
You're going on your own. Now that's an interesting response, isn't it? But where does such a response like that come from? A belief that the woman rules in the marriage like the husband by human right, and I will assert what I believe to be, and I believe that going to another place in another town is against the best interests of our family, so I assert that we stay here and not go to another town. Well, what do you do then? How do you reconcile a relationship? One gives in. One must surrender. One must humble themselves in order to allow and to keep the peace. And if it is done, as it is often done, there is a process of humiliation that is involved. And it's a matter of who has the strongest will and the best wit and ability to beat down the other person in order to get what they believe is the best for the family situation. And so that those who pledge themselves to each other to love and care and to hold and to bless one another end up becoming enemies of some description, while seeking to maintain the image of love and blessing before the children, if there happens to be children. Because the issue of co-equality makes living in a relationship with husband and wife very difficult if the two individuals are two separate, co-equal, co-eternal, beings. Where there's no recognition of an inheritance, no recognition of the need to bless. The responsibility of the husband and father to bless his wife and his children, to be careful of the words that he speaks over them, and to never ask them to do anything that they haven't first prayed about and checked with the Lord as to whether this is actually what God would wish for them.
Sorry, I was just going to say, because it just popped into my head, so I'll say it. If you bring in a third co-eternal being into that little group, what happens then?
You've got an adjudicator.
That's the truth.
You can get a majority vote that way. So the children, you bring the children in, and the parents are appealing to the children to win the vote.
No, not equal. So it's actually a third co-equal person, another man or another woman.
Yeah.
Doesn't work well.
Well, there are many that claims it does. I've seen some articles recently talking about couples with two women and one man, and they say it works fine, because you've got three and you can get a vote.
Ask Abraham about that.
Yes.
How long does it work for?
How long does it work for? This is the question. And so there are many elements to this question. There's so much that we could cover on this particular subject. I've written some of these things in the book. This is the beginning, called Original Love, where I've tried to address some aspects of this, a biblical love story, and the reclaiming of agape within a marriage relationship. And I would say, and I remember I was talking this with someone some years ago, and when I laid out to them the aspiration that I had in terms of reclaiming the human relationship in terms of God and His Son, they said, that sounds impossible. Sounds impossible. How can we, who've been raised in a Judeo-Christian environment of co-equal, co-eternal concepts without inheritance, how can we go back into a situation of headship, a principle of headship and submission, reflecting that of Abraham and Sarah, where Sarah called Abraham what? Lord. Lord. Oh my. How do we go back to that? Just tell them. Hey, darling, you'll call me Lord from now on. Yes. And what? Without trying to be flippant, because we're treading into some very delicate territory here, trying to address these things. If we are the children of Abraham, then will we contract and work on marriage on the same platform as Abraham and Sarah did, without the Hagar component?
Can I just add something, Adrian? I did say just tell them, but it would be dependent upon men acting like they deserve to be called that. That might have a bit of a difference as well. If we treat them with such love and respect, then they could quite comfortably say, Lord, the giver of gifts.
And that's certain when we look at the Father, obviously in the way that he is the honourable nature of God and the way he has blessed his Son and is always true and his purpose is right, that he has earned the respect of his Son. But obviously in the human, what happens in a human relationship where a husband makes a mistake and he fails? If respect is based only on the fact that he has earned that respect, if he should fall, what happens then? Do you stop respecting them? Well, it's naturally going to happen. As long as, and it could be interpreted this way, as long as you give me everything I want all the time, I'll respect you. And if you don't, I won't. That's the potential. There's the potential for that to happen within the relationship. And so it's certainly true that obviously if a husband is not providing for his wife, he's not caring for her needs, that he is damaging the relationship and the potential for respect goes down tremendously. But this is where we begin to think of women like Abigail. What did Abigail do? She was married to what type of a man? A churlish man. In short, an idiot. Huh?
A big idiot.
A big idiot. So there you go. How did Abigail relate to Nabal? It would have been a very difficult assignment for her to deal with in that situation. And the potential for Nabal to exist in our existing culture today is very high. Because, and just in short, why is that so? Because we've been living under the influence of the Rockefeller Association and an agenda to feminize our society, to take men, their identity away from them, and to take from them the sense that they have any position in society other than to reproduce and then go and sit in the corner and die.
Go and earn an income.
We'll go and earn an income, then die. Pay off the house first, then you can die. There is certainly that element. And particularly, and my son and I certainly talk about this, the whole concept of white privilege, and the determination to destroy the capacity for a young white man to exist in this society in any kind of masculine way. And so, is it any wonder that a lot of men are saying, hey, you know what, it would be better for me if I was transgender. It'd be better for me if I had an operation and made myself a woman, because it's a lot better that way than this way. That's why a lot of men are doing this now. Just being a male in our society is just not as good as it used to be. But this is the fruit. This is the throwback of what were men doing in the 1940s and the 1950s. Killing each other, but other than that. Working hard? Splitting timber? But when he came home, what did the wife do when he came home in the 1940s, 50s?
Put his food on the table,
put his slippers on, put the food on the table, make sure everything was just, Do you think some men took advantage of that? Absolutely.
The families look forward to him coming home.
The family looked forward to him coming home. As long as he didn't go by the pub for the 6 o'clock swell. So, yeah, we've certainly had a transition that has taken place within our society. And so the question that keeps coming into my mind is it possible for us to reclaim God's ideal for marriage with the broken down nature of our society and the difficulty that there is in coming back into this headship and submission? And this is something that obviously Laurel and I talk about a lot in our relationship in terms of applying the principles of the divine pattern and the natural inclination to, as we've both been raised and trained and we both have operated in, that, you know, we have the capacity to take care of things, and many of the things that Laurel and I have talked about have related around to the fact that she will take upon herself responsibilities which she doesn't have to take upon herself, that because as the head of the house, the buck stops with me, and so if someone has a problem, she doesn't have to take responsibility for fixing that problem. That's my responsibility. And so she can pray for me, and there's the challenge. What if you don't have confidence that your husband can fix the situation?
Because there are some men who want.
There are a lot of men. Not some. A lot.
I'm being kind.
A lot of men who, for whatever reason, lack that EQ. What's EQ? Emotional quotient. To be able to discern emotionally the lay of the land and how to resolve a situation. And I suppose it's true that Abigail was in that situation. Her husband had an EQ of 0 and minus. You're in form. Woo! Minus 0. Okay. That she had in her situation, in order to save her household and in an endeavour to save her husband, to take a matter into her hands and to send before David, out to David, a gift of hospitality, and to follow that up with hospitality and a pleading. And what does Abigail say to David? Calls him my Lord. There it is. But she says, let the sin of my husband fall upon. Whoa. That's amazing, isn't it? I've pondered that. I thought, is she just speaking nice words to smooth this over with him? Is this the real deal? Well, the Spirit of Prophecy says it's the real deal. Because she says the Spirit of Christ was abiding in her soul and she took upon herself the sin of her husband. Why? Because she loved her husband, even though he's a fool. Only the Spirit of God could do something like that. And she pled for his life. And I've mentioned this in other presentations, like, here's your opportunity, love. Like David, he's over there, the property's yours. Just get me out of this marriage, please. But she doesn't. She pleads for the life of her husband. And I find that really interesting. And so, for those of us that have been studying these issues in regard to the divine pattern, the fact that we are having generations of men who have not been trained to bless and care for their families, to put that first, but rather to focus on football and cars and the things that please them. That's and to I guess I call it the Nimrod syndrome. What's the Nimrod syndrome? Well, Nimrod married his mother. Someone to look after him, so he can go out and play football and do whatever he wants, and then she can pay the bills, take care of everything else, make sure the house is taken care of, and he just becomes child number 3, 4, whatever. And many relationships are operating in this kind of a situation, which is making life very, very difficult in our society today. And of course, we're moving on from that to another difficulty, in that because men are not blessing their wives, women are experiencing more and more worthlessness, and in order to feel good about themselves, they are doing the one thing that is going to give them the opposite of what they want, and that is they are dressing more and more seductively to more and more enslave and destroy the men that are in their lives. And that's why there is a majority, I would say, of men that are enslaved to pornography and all these types of things. The third most visited website in the US is a pornography website. The enslavement. And once you get to that point, once a man becomes enslaved to that type of thinking, his manhood is completely destroyed. And his ability to see his wife as someone to bless, that's not even in the equation. And so we're in an alarming situation. And so the question that I'm putting to us tonight is, should we even try to aspire to the marriage that God designed for us?
It's like Peter though, says when Jesus asked him, will you leave also? He said, where can we go?
Where can we go?
There is nowhere else to go. There is no other option.
There is no other option, is there, but to seek to come into harmony with the relationship of the Father and the Son. And I think one of the biggest things that has helped in that transition, in my thinking at least, is the whole concept that our Father doesn't judge. Can you imagine taking judgment out of a relationship? You're not judging your partner. Whew. Do you think that could make a big difference for us? The temptation to feel irritated at your partner and all the issues of miscommunication that have gone on because of the baggage that is built up. And that's why I believe that a key component of the message that we have been given involves a legacy to the coming generation of how that marriage could be conducted in a way that it hasn't been conducted before, based upon the principles of the only Father and the only begotten Son. And what does it look like? What does it look like for the divine pattern to be operating in a marriage? What does it look like for a husband to be truly blessing his wife and his children? What does it look like for a woman to have a sense of being in submission to her husband? What does that look like? Because how many of us were raised in relationships like that? That's the thing. When it hasn't been demonstrated for us, how do we reclaim this? We have to be asking God, how do I fulfill the biblical role that God has given to me? Because the greatest blessing, this is one of the texts, and I've mentioned this a number of times, the success of the church, the community, and the nation depends upon home influences. Right home influences. And one loving family, I like the way Ellen White words it, well-disciplined, well-ordered. Guess you had to be there. One well-disciplined, well-ordered family speaks more for Christianity than all the sermons that can be preached. And so, while we can continue to present principles, and unless we are coming into line with those principles, and the hearts of the fathers turn to the children and the children to the fathers, through the process of the wife taking the active role of submission and the husband reclaiming his sense of headship, realizing his need to bless his wife, and the wife to be able to be an example to her children of how to respond to someone in headship by not publicly second guessing him and telling him what a goose he is for the decisions that he's made. And the man getting irritated and barking orders and screaming at his wife and his children. Unless we can deal with those issues, the blessing that God has offered us through the marriage relationship, it won't come to us. But I believe that this is something that we still need to ask the Lord to guide us in because of what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3. And the impact of these words. Talking about an elder, a bishop in the King James. An elder. An elder then, verse 2, must be blameless. Well, how many men get excluded right there? None of us can be elders then. Husband of one wife. There's a whole sermon just on that part. Vigilant, sober, of good behaviour, given to hospitality. Hospitality. Apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker. Striker. How many women were struck tonight in Australia by their husbands? Quite a lot. Not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection. That means having his children with a submissive spirit. How does he give to his children a submissive spirit? By beating them into subjection? No, by nurturing his wife, who demonstrates to his children a submissive spirit so that they can learn to be submissive. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house or care for his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? And this is the verse that tells me there is no other way. Because the church of God cannot flourish unless there is a restoration of the marriage relationship within the home. Pure religion and undefiled, Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, to keep yourself unspotted from the world. This is James 1:27.
I'd just like to read a couple of highlights out of Mount of Blessings just to support this. He enunciated the law of marriage for all the children of Adam to the close of time. That which the eternal Father himself had pronounced good was the law of highest blessing and development for man. And here's one more. But it is the purpose of the gospel to restore its purity and beauty, referring to marriage.
To restore its purity and beauty. Yeah. And that is a challenge in the many, many people I talk to that have had a difficult time in marriage. And even for those that have what we would consider to be a strong marriage, there's still the challenge, the arguments, the frustrations, how do we resolve questions? How do we settle decisions in a way that does not involve the use of manipulation, force, and all of those things? It's a constant challenge. And I would suggest that one of the easiest ways for us to address these things is that if you believe that your Father in heaven loves you and you are a child of God and that He will supply all your needs, and you trust Him to supply all your needs, you can start to let go of control of your situation. That's the number one issue, to let go of the control of your situation and to defend and protect yourself and to ensure that your rights are protected as an individual. So the first identity war to win is that you are a child of God, and that God loves you and that He cares for you and that He's not going to allow you to be tempted above what you're able to bear. He's going to take care of you. That's one of the greatest greatest challenges. And then to enter into the spirit and the mindset of the begotten Son, one of gratitude, to show thankfulness and to pour out blessing. And I know that in our message we have, and we will do so again on the weekend, we've employed the principle of the blessing. We've tried it in different ways. We've done this where we have asked all the ladies to come to the front and given them a rose. I know we did that in Germany at one of the meetings that we had there too, and to let them know that the ladies amongst us are important. They're a blessing, and to bless the grandparents that are amongst us because of the inheritance that we have received. To acknowledge those that have gone before us, and these are some of the things that, at least in my mind, that I'm trying to visualize. What would it look like for a community to operate within a channel of blessing? To invite children to come forward and to receive blessing, to know that they are a beloved child of God. These are some of the ways that, for myself, I'm trying to envision what a community would look like where a channel of blessing is operating and the divine pattern is operating. And again, that's on Sabbath. It's something that I want to participate in again. And I can certainly say, on that particular point, I know, and I'm just doing a bit of history, but in 2014 and 15, when I would travel all in different countries and different places around the world, and you would come and meet with a group of people that you probably hadn't met before. And you would do a few presentations, and then on the Sabbath, when the Sabbath would come, you would invite the people forward to receive a blessing. The whole atmosphere in the meeting changed. There was more joy, there was more blessing. And there's one thing that particularly sticks in my mind was I was out in the back of Romania, and this young couple came. You couldn't even drive up to the house. You had to walk up to the house. There's no driveway to the front door. To walk up to the house, and this young Greek Orthodox couple was there, and I talked about the blessing principle. And this Greek Orthodox couple, the young man, he came to the front, and as I simply said those words over him, "Your Father in heaven says to you now, you are my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." As I uttered those words, his girlfriend in the corner, she broke down and started to sob. Obviously knowing something that this young man probably had never ever heard words like this in her life, or she herself was thinking for herself that, is it true that I could be a beloved child of God? These things, I would say, because we practice these things on a regular basis, it can feel like, well, that's just normal, but how many people out there have ever heard, "You are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased"? Some of them have never heard it, never received it. And so this is the work of the elders and leaders, to visit the fatherless and the widows, to speak words of blessing, because they say, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me." It's not true. And the reverse of that as well, to speak words of blessing has great power. To say to a young person, I've got confidence that you can handle this situation. I believe in you, that you'll be able to handle the situation. I'm praying for you. The need for this within our relationships is really, really important. And so these are some of the ways that I have tried myself and others to envisage what it would look like for a community to have a channel of blessing. I guess at this particular point, I have a sense within myself that there is still something major that needs to change for all of us, for us to really enter into this channel of blessing. That's the sense that I have. There's still some major shift that we I'm not sure exactly whether it's just an issue of us growing into this message, or whether there's some element, or we just need to receive more of the Spirit than we have now. But from my observation and what I'm seeing, there's still a major step that needs to take place for us to move into more than simple lip service to the divine pattern, headship and submission and blessing taking place within our nuclear families and our wider Christian family. Anyone else would agree with that? And the thing is that I believe that our Father in heaven will give it to us. And I suppose it's my prayer tonight is that we would ask our Father how to give us the wisdom, since we're at Passover, at unleavened bread, that God will give us the wisdom and His Spirit in order to continue the work of reform, of coming into the place of headship and submission. And of course, within that community, to have a place for those that are single parents with children to feel blessed and operating within that and still feeling part of the community, because many are in a lonely situation, having been in a difficult marriage situation, and so, well, is that it for me? Is it over? Like, am I going to be alone now? And how we address all those kinds of issues as well. So, I would like if we could open up for a prayer season, and we might say goodbye to our online audience, that we could just as a community together to pray and ask our Father to help us to move more into this process and how we can reclaim the marriage relation for the blessing of both the marriages and our greater community, to support the children and the singles amongst us, that we can have a greater sense of gratitude, joy and freedom that God is promising to us. Can we do that?